Hi, I am Colleen Rue, and I'm excited to be here with you guys. I am actually what they call the voice of the mountain at an event called 29029, and I did not give myself that name. Everybody always makes fun of me. I did not give myself that name. But more importantly, I get to be the host and the MC of many different events like 29029. I am a race announcer for half marathons and other distance races. I also host and MC other corporate events and things. I've just been able to, in my life, find my voice and use it to help connect people to adventures, connect people to themselves. And it's just a privilege for me to be able to do that. So I kind of have an uncommon job. When people ask what I do, I'm like, I talk in a microphone to people for long periods of time, and I tell terrible jokes. So I'm also an athlete. I am a very enthusiastic runner. I love to run. And right now I do a lot of ultra distance running, but I've also been involved in Ironman triathlon and different other distances of triathlon. So I have quite a background in endurance sports. I've also been a fitness professional for over 20 years, where I've coached and I've personal trained lots of different athletes. So I have a lot of things on my resume, a lot of different things on my resume, but I'm just happy to be here and to share with you guys.
Well,
Sure.
I am so happy to have you on.
I am happy that you asked. This is great. It's nice for me to not have to host. I get to just sit back and relax. I like it.
Yes, really, I just want to hear about your adventures and your journey.
Yeah. Well, those are kind of two different things. How I got into being an announcer and like my life has been, it's interesting as I look back, if I go back 10 years, I never ever would have guessed that I would be doing what I do for a living. I would have no idea. I was not doing that. And then if I go back even farther, it wasn't even in my mind that I would do something like this. I mean, I came out of high school and I was going to college in political science. I was a paralegal. I did all of that. I loved it. I wanted to be an attorney. I loved the law and I loved learning about that kind of stuff. But I always did fitness as well. And so I was teaching step aerobics class back in 1996 on a carpeted floor in little tiny Cedar City, Utah. And I was only, I graduated when I was 17, I guess, and was just about to turn 18 and started teaching step aerobics because I had always kind of had a fitness thing. I always loved to do the Jane Fonda tapes, and I always had my get in shape girl things that I got for Christmas. So fitness was always something I loved. My aunt used to take me to her fitness classes with her. And I started teaching right outside of high school and became a spinning instructor and kind of got into that. But I was always full-time working in a law firm. I started at 16 years old as a file clerk and cleaning the bathrooms at an attorney's office that my mom worked for, and kind of worked my way up to being a legal secretary. And I did victim services. I was a victim advocate. I worked for a guardian ad litem's office who protects abused and neglected children. And I was an athlete on the side. I would do, triathlon and things like that, but I'm not a particularly gifted athlete because I'm I'm just not. I'm 5'11". I'm really tall. I was always gangly growing up. And I remember my dad saying to me, he's like, you shouldn't run. You're just not built to run. I'm like, okay. So I really didn't run a lot or do anything like that. I danced all the way through high school. But then as I was getting into being a fitness instructor, I got the opportunity to do a triathlon. And I was like, well, I can run 6 miles just as a third leg in this event. And so I kind of got into triathlon and long distance cycling and still working full time as a paralegal. My life circumstances kind of changed. I actually was married really young, right outside of high school. And that marriage ended just 3 years later, but it propelled me and gave me opportunities to do some other things. And so I was able to move to Washington, D.C. I worked for a Utah senator back there. I was a paralegal in a law firm back there, but I was always teaching fitness classes on the side. I was at like Bally's Total Fitness back in Washington, D.C. So I'm really aging myself here, but I was always doing that kind of stuff. And so fitness was always a huge part of my life. I ran my first marathon was my Marine Corps marathon in 2001. It was right after 9/11 had happened in Washington, D.C. And I lived there at the time. And since then, I've just always gravitated to this long distance events. I've done, my gosh, people count up their marathons and they know exactly how many marathons they do. I don't. I know it's somewhere north of like 40, but I'm not sure where that is because I just don't, I guess, pay attention enough for that. But I've always loved that. I got into doing more competitive triathlon in about 2000, probably 2009, 2010. I remarried and had my first baby in 2006. And that kind of propelled me into a little more of a triathlon career. And I was an age grouper. I was a decent age grouper who was able to qualify for the Ironman 70.3 World Championships a couple of times. I completed 2 full distance Ironmans. And I really loved that for a period of time. It was good until I was like, it's not good. I don't want the stress of Ironman anymore. And I found ultra running, and that's where I've been ever since. And it's just an interesting journey. So it's like I have this fitness journey that's always been a part of my life. And I love it. I've always been a personal trainer. I was a fitness director at a facility here in Southern Utah where I live. And there's just pathways as far as finding my voice that I never saw coming. And it all kind of like, I found my voice and fitness was a part of it. And now I am traveling across, the nation at finish lines and at events where I get to use my voice and I get to use my knowledge in health and fitness. I mean, the story is just so deep, Robin. I could go on for days. You never give me like a blank. You don't ever give me a blank runway because you're in trouble. So
Did you, a question that some of our listeners may ask, did you start with half marathons first, or did you just go right out and start doing marathons?
ooh, that's a good question. And I have to think back because my first running event would have been part of triathlon. So it was a 10K and an Olympic distance triathlon. I don't recall. I'm trying to think if I did a half marathon before I did a marathon. I don't think I did.
You just went for it.
I think I just went for it. I really don't think so, because when I did my first marathon, I remember I was sitting in my office and one of my colleagues came in and she was like, hey, have you ever thought about running a marathon? And I'm like, not really. She's like, well, I'm going to do it. And she was raising money for a charity. And she's like, you just have to raise money. We can get a bib and get in. I'm like, okay. So, that's kind of what propelled me into it. So I don't think I did a half marathon before that. I've probably done fewer half marathons than I have marathons. Just because I'm not very fast, Robin. I prefer long distances.
Here's a question. You've talked about biking and running, but you haven't talked about swimming. So that's part of the triathlon, part of the
Yes.
Ironman. How did that come about? Because you haven't spoke about that piece yet.
Yeah. So I actually had a little bit of swimming background because my mom can't swim. And so she was determined that we would swim so we would save ourselves. That was really her theory over making us swim. And so I actually swam, I'm going to put it in quotes, competitively in like middle school. So I was trained in swimming when I was in middle school, and I was a decent little swimmer. But once I got into high school, the high school coach actually said to me, he's like, hey, I want you to swim. I want you to breaststroke for me. I mean, look at you. You're almost 5'11", you're full grown. I'd love for you to breaststroke. And I was like, no, I'm going to do drill team. And so I never swam in high school, but I had some swimming experience. So swimming was not a big hurdle for me. I really enjoyed swimming. And as I got a little deeper into triathlon, I would just join like masters groups and things like that. And so swimming was something I really actually enjoyed doing. So I know other triathletes that can be like their hurdle, their barrier to getting in, but I had some experience in swimming. No superstar. I am by far not a superstar in my athletic career. So.
Oh my gosh. So you finished 2 full Ironmans.
Yes. Yes, I did. My first Ironman was in 2012, and it was here. I say here, I live in St. George, Utah. St. George, Utah had a full Ironman distance triathlon it went for 3 years. So yeah, I think it was 3 years, 2010, 11, and 12, it was competed. And so that was my very first Ironman. And I was really well trained. It was the first time in my life I'd actually got a coach and learned a whole lot of stuff. I got like my own coach. I wasn't just writing my own plans. And it taught me so much. Ironman taught me so much about how to take care of my body, how to train my body, and what my body could actually do. The 2012 St. George Ironman, if anybody's familiar with it, it was just extremely difficult conditions. We had heavy, high winds. We had heavy, I'm going to call it surf, though we weren't in the ocean. We were in a reservoir, but we had terrible water conditions, terrible wind conditions. And I actually ended up being the first local female to cross the line in St. George. So that was kind of fun after a hard fought battle that day. And then I went on in 2013 and I did what was known as the old Vineman full distance triathlon. Ironman has since purchased the Vineman brand and they now run it under the Ironman brand. But back when I did it in 2013, it was Vineman and it was in Northern California and it was awesome. It ended up being a great race for me. And I was able to finish top in the female. It was like top like fourth or fifth in the females at that race. So that was a fun race.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. I did love Ironman. And it's strange because I have two children. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. And at the time when I was doing Ironman, they were actually pretty little. They were like preschool and just early elementary school age. And I felt like it was so much easier for me to train then. There's different stages that we go through in life with our kids and with our motherhood and things like that. And I felt like I was just in a good place when my kids were at preschool. I wasn't really working as much because I was focused on the kids. It was a little bit easier to train. And so my time training wasn't necessarily taking away from my family. It was my only time alone. So it was a little bit easier back then. And as it got a little more difficult, as you know, when kids get bigger, life changes and they have their own schedules. And so it started the Ironman world's a competitive world. It's mentally and physically challenging. And I got a little bit tired of that and wanted to move on to something that filled my soul a little bit more. And that's where I fell in love with trail running and ultra distance.
Tell us about both of those. So I do see a lot of your pictures on Instagram where you're out on the trails with your family, your husband. You have a fantastic support system, which is always super helpful. Tell us about trail running.
Yeah, I found trail running in 2015, I think it was. I was just so tired of triathlon and the competitive nature of that sport. It's like I would go out and do a workout, it would post to Strava and somebody would comment and be like, "Oh, did you have a hard day today?" And I was like, "No, I didn't have a hard day today." It's like, actually, it was pretty good. Did you look at the elevation change? It was just, I felt like there was just a lot of eyes and I felt a lot of pressure in the Ironman world. And I had a friend who she was getting into trail running and she's like, "Hey, why don't you come and I'll show you some of these local trails." And of course I live in Southern Utah. It's like a mecca for trail running, but I was a roadie. I was doing everything on the road. And so I went out in the dirt with her and I just loved it. It was just something that I really, really enjoyed. The pace was so much slower. The expectation of performance was different every time because the trails were different. The conditions were different. And the trail running community is they're such a beautiful community because they don't get caught up in things. They're not worried about what they're wearing. They've got big beards. The guys have big beards and they're wearing plaid shirts and they're super happy. If a course isn't marked perfectly, they're like, "Oh, I ran some extra miles today, no big deal." It's like, if you did that in Ironman, people would literally lose their mind. And so I really gravitated towards that kind of laid back, less stressful form of exercising. I was just tired of beating myself up all the time, just trying to hit these PRs and, the expectation of people wanting you to get better and better and better. And it's like, I'm just not that great of an athlete. I'm good, but it's like, I'm not going to be a sponsored athlete. I'm not going to be a professional. So I just kind of found a home on the trails, and that's just stuck with me. I did my first 50K and 50 miler the first year that I was running trails, and I just loved it. I hated to love it. I mean, it's something that's really difficult, but there's just something that really fills your soul when you do things like that. That is just different from what I found in Ironman and triathlon.
And that probably brought you back to your days of doing something for yourself, being out on the trail alone
Yeah, for
and
sure. For
and
sure.
enjoying the scenery.
Yeah. And that's the thing is ultra running. I always tell people, if you don't like running, you just haven't run far enough yet. You just haven't gone far enough, because a 3 mile run, there's nothing worse than a 3 mile run. It's so hard for everyone, even a well-trained athlete. I always joke with my husband. I'm like, I warm up at about mile 15. Like, I feel great. I'm finally ready to run at mile 15. So up until 15, no, I feel like trash. And so it's, I really think that, where I'm like, just slow down and just find that long distance that suits you. And for me, it's those really long efforts. And I just can settle in, and I just enjoy that. And it's okay to be slow. It's okay to just be out there. It's okay to hike. It's okay. I feel like I have permission out on the trails to stop and take a picture, to, meet new people, and not always be in this space where I just have to push all the time. And I really like that space.
When I look at Facebook, I see a lot of the runners, a lot of the trail groups that I'm involved in. And something that I've really avoided is comparing myself to others, because it's really easy to get caught up in that. I am a 20-minute miler and I don't care. And I'll do the jeffing. So I'll, jog for a couple minutes, walk for a minute, jog for a couple minutes, walk for a minute. And I was just telling my coach that it doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I'm never going to probably hit a 10-minute mile. I will probably never hit a 15-minute mile. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. And I don't really care. I'm out there for the enjoyment and for me. I'm still off the couch. I'm still getting exercise. I'm enjoying the outdoors. I get to see things. I can walk with friends. It really is just it is very refreshing when you stop comparing yourself.
Yeah. And I envy, Robin, that you found that, because that is something I truly struggle with. I mean, even on a day where I've got a training plan and I'm supposed to do an easy day or something, if I'm not comparing myself to someone else, I'm comparing myself to my prior self. That's
Mhm.
really something that I've struggled with, because I've done a lot of endurance events since I was, 19 years old. So there's a lot of years. I'm 43 now. There's a lot of races to compare to. There's a lot of different bodies to compare to. And I love that. I love what you said at it, just being comfortable with what you're doing, knowing that what you're doing is something positive for you mentally and physically, and being so happy in that space.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm a
That's
strong 20-minute mile. I'll go with that.
great. I think it's awesome. And in my job, where I race, announce, and I host and MC a lot of these events, I love to see the stories unfold at the back of the pack, if you will, because those first runners, they come through and they do their thing and they walk away. They don't even want their medal. They don't even care. But there's people out there who have enjoyed every minute of that experience. And maybe if they're not enjoying it, they have worked so hard for that experience. And one thing that I do when I'm hosting, especially when I'm race announcing at events like half marathons, is I make sure that I am as present as I was for the first person as I am for the last person, because I truly believe that those people who are out there doing their pace, everyone's out there doing their very, very best. And we should never shortchange anyone's effort, no matter what it looks like. And we should never judge that effort, no matter what it looks like, because everyone comes to these events with a different journey behind them. And let's celebrate every single journey.
Mhm.
And so I always joke, I'm like, let's get those front runners out of the way and let's actually have some fun here. Let's actually like dig in and have a great time, because that's where it's at. If we want to have longevity, if we want to enjoy doing these things with our bodies for the rest of our lives, we are not going to be, sub 3:30 marathoners. We are not going to be running 6-minute miles.
No.
And, and that's okay. That's great. Let's celebrate that.
Yeah, I started my journey. I am going to throw a shout out to Jeremy Alexander Newsome. He is a two-time 29029 finisher.
Yes, he's an
And
awesome friend.
I just adore Jeremy. He was at Utah in 2019, and then he was at Idaho at 21,
Yep.
just the last year, 2021. He actually named the podcast I Can Do Anything podcast while he was in Utah climbing the mountain.
I love it. I love it.
So there is that. And then with his journey and following him with his trading group, I started my own blog last summer. So when the hikers were hiking in Idaho, I went out that Saturday and started to hike the small elevation that we have here in Madison, Wisconsin. And those types of things are just, it's about the journey. And I will say, you 100% were on track with the beginning of blowing the horn to all the way to the very last finishers that were coming up within the last 2-3 minutes of the event. And as a participant in a half marathon, I believe I had 3 minutes left before the cutoff. And the announcer announced my name and where I was from, just like he did for the first people. And that really made me feel good. So just so you know, you are so appreciated.
I appreciate you saying that. And I'm glad to hear that other people are recognizing that too, that let's be there for everybody, no matter what. And it's just so important. And, going back to people like Jeremy, the souls of this community, this endurance community is so amazing. And the people that we meet, they really will change our lives. And if we get out of that competitive place, if we put those things down, we drop our barriers and we just go out and we have these adventures with these other human beings that exist on this planet with us, we are going to find some incredible stories, some incredible people that it's just going to inspire us to keep going. And that's why I love people like Jeremy. I just smile. I just see his beard and his big hug. Like I love it. I can sense it right now, because that sense of community that is built regardless of what our competition is, regardless of what, who was fastest that day. And that's what I love about 29 is it is a you versus you type of a challenge. It's an Everesting challenge. We give you 36 hours. There's a clock. We want to see how far you can go. We're going to push you. We want to see what you can really dig and how far you can go. But at the end of the day, it's about the community that we take with us up to those different summits. And yeah, it's a strong one. It's a beautiful thing. And I think that's why I get so addicted to this endurance world, is because of the people in it.
Yeah, my apologies. I jumped to this, but we never got from where you were a participant and how did you get into announcing?
This is an interesting story, Robin. Let's go back. Let's take a step back. I'm still, every time I tell this story, I'm floored by it. So I told you I was a paralegal and things like that. I was going to school and I went back to Washington, D.C. I came home. I worked as a paralegal here in Utah and married my husband, Adam. We had our first baby, Sydney, and I decided just to be a stay-at-home mom and do my fitness thing and get to be home with her. And so I was just a fitness professional, as you would call it. I was teaching classes. I was managing some other instructors and another fitness facility. And I had the opportunity to work with a radio station, and they were doing a Biggest Loser style weight loss challenge. And we were kind of the sponsor location. We provided the trainers to help these people. It really was a fun activity that we did. And I got to know the radio personalities who had came over to do that, and actually became really good friends with the female radio host on this show. Her name was Lorraine and her husband was Chris. And I ended up personal training her. And we actually, to this day, we're good friends and we actually still work together. And in that relationship that was built through this strange radio competition that we were doing, I don't know why, but her husband was her morning show partner on the radio, but he was also the operations manager for the radio group that they were at. And he texted me one day, and all he said was, "Have you ever considered being in radio?" And I was like, no, not a day in my life, like not one day in my life. And what's funny is my husband and my older brother actually knew each other in college, and they were on the radio together because they were in a radio program together. My little brother was in a radio program in college as well. Me, I was a political science major. I had nothing to do with it. It wasn't even on my radar until I got this text. And I was like, no, I've never considered that. I don't even know what that means. And so he brought me into the studio. He kind of showed me what radio meant and said, why don't you just record some stuff for the weekends and try this out? And I did, and it was fun. And he's like, you know what, you're really kind of a natural at this. You're pretty good. And I was like, okay, great. I'm just doing me. And so I did radio for a couple of months, and his wife, my friend, who was his morning show host, she actually had an injury that ended up going into an infection and getting sick and having to take time off work. And he came to me as this person who had been on the radio for 4 months and said, "Hey, will you come and be on this morning show with me?" And I was like, great. Again, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just sitting behind a microphone. And so I got the opportunity to be on that morning show. She was able to come back about a month and a half later. And I thought, okay, my time is up. I'll go back to just recording my weekend show and everything will be great, when they actually extended me an offer to make their husband and wife team a 3-man team with me on that radio show as well. And so that kind of started my radio journey, which led into, I was always working at races. I was working on the operations side of races. I had friends who were race directors. I was the race director of a local event. So I was working on the backside of events a lot, and I enjoyed that. My husband is actually a sound guy. He runs a sound company. And so he was always hired to do the sound and announcing at these races. So you can see how this is all kind of starting to mesh in together.
Yes, yes.
So we would end up at the same races because he was doing sound, I was working operations. That got really tricky as our kids started to get a little bit older and a little more mobile. And I was just kind of cutting back on my work time at the events, and I would just go and I would run the race, and then I'd hang out with him, and I'd take the kids so that he could finish working. And one day he was like, "I need to go do an award ceremony. Will you just take this microphone and just call in some of these runners?" And I'm like, okay, great. And so he gave me the little computer. I got the microphone and I got in the chute and I just started calling people in. I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm very comfortable. I've been a fitness instructor for a long time. I'm comfortable in front of people, and I just started doing it. And the owners of the race, who I had known for years, I'd worked for them for years, they were like, "Who's on the microphone? Like, who is that? What's going on here?" And Adam was like, "It's Colleen." And they're like, "Oh, we really like her." And it was funny because they had never seen me in that role. They had never considered me in that role. And so that kind of led into what my husband calls is the day he got fired from doing race announcing. And I began race announcing. And from that point forward, things have I've stayed in radio and worked in lots of different places in radio and really found my voice at events. And to the point that I'm like, you know what, this is what I'm here for. Like, this is what I was put here to do.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I kind of found myself at 40 some odd, or almost 40 years old, found what I was really good at. It's baffling to me. I never in a million years would have seen myself here.
I have watched, like I said, Instagram and YouTube videos, and you are just amazing. Everybody adores you. Everybody can't wait to see you. I know that when I heard that you like the Uncrustables from up on top of the mountain and people bring them down in the gondola, I thought, I'm going to give her an Uncrustable when I'm in Vermont in 2022.
I
So
love it.
I just love how people rally around you, but you really do have just a natural way about you of being positive and encouraging And I've seen your arm around so many different participants, just getting them through and giving them that extra special your extra special words. I don't know what they were, but you see people go right back up on the mountain after they've talked to you. Other people post pictures on Instagram of 29029, and you're always there supporting everyone. And I can tell you're exhausted sometimes, but you never let that show. You are right back at it, getting all those people right back up the mountain, and that is your special talent.
And it's something that I feel so much gratitude that I'm able to do that. I always say I have a front row seat to like people doing incredible things. And sure, it's tiring. I mean, these are 36-hour events. I don't get to sleep much, but at the end of the day, there is nothing that fills my cup more than being some small part of this journey for people. And it really is, I'm just so blown away every time. And especially at 29029, it's such a special event. It truly is. And it's hard to express it to people until you're there, until you see it, until you feel what's going on there. It's such a special thing. And the way that we can connect with people. I'm a real believer of connection with people. Like, how can we connect with each other? How can we look each other in the eye? How can we call each other by name? Because in those little connections, it brings out the best in all of us. This world so many times wants us to think that we're so divided and that things are so bad and we can't be friends with each other because you live in Wisconsin and I live in Southern Utah and you vote one way, I vote the other. We look different. It doesn't matter. I've seen so many times, especially on the mountain at 29029, where everyone's facade, if you will, just kind of melts away. We're just our human pieces and we're so connected by that. And it's such, again, I am so full of gratitude to be able to do that. It's just beyond my wildest dreams.
I do have one clarification, though. I respectfully disagree with your statement about being a small part of the event. You are basically the event, not to take away from Jesse, Mark, or Colin, but I respectfully disagree. You are a huge part of the event.
Oh, you're so nice. And I just love what I do. I love what I do. And I hope that I can do it for years to come, that I'm never too old. I told my husband the other day, I'm like, I'm going to be this old lady and they're going to be like, we don't want the old lady anymore. But I do. I just, that's so kind of you to say, because it truly is. And, going back to 29029, even the way I started with 29029, they didn't know who I was. I didn't know who they were. And they had so much faith to give me this microphone and say, okay, here you go. Because that's a lot of trust that you're putting in someone when you hand over your brand to them. So
That is true. I did really like the story that you had on the 29029 podcast about how you thought they had forgot about you because you had sent an email. And then you thought, well, I'm just going to send one more email just in case. And here, had you not done that,
yeah.
you would not be helping people up the mountain. So thanks to your perseverance.
Yeah. I mean, it just goes back to be willing to reach out. And that's what I did. It was like I cold called the race director. I was like, hey, I'm a female announcer. I think I'm pretty good. would you like me to come to your event? And, I heard nothing back in response. And I was really nervous about that. I was like, oh my gosh, because as brave as I seem sometimes I'm not very brave inside. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've ruined this. I must look, just like an idiot. And I had another friend who had worked with the race director, Garth, and he's like, just reach out to him again. And I did. I just sent him another email. Hey, just circling back around. And that was it. He's like, I totally forgot to email you back, as I'm beating myself up for sending this. But 6 weeks later, I'm so glad I did that. I mean, it really was. It's those little moments that change our lives. When my husband hands me the microphone at a finish line just to call in some people when he's busy, and being willing to send out an email, not knowing what's going to come back. Amazing things can open up from those things. So
Getting out of your comfort zone and doing something that you didn't want to do has
yeah.
led to an amazing life.
Yeah, no, it really has. And, people who follow our family on Facebook and Instagram, they're just like, my gosh, you guys are everywhere. Cause we go to some beautiful places for these events, and they take us to beautiful places, and we have access. My kids are like, do we have to go to Grand Teton National Park again? It's like, oh, poor you. You're so spoiled. Because we have been given the opportunity to do so many things in so many beautiful places. So
What's in store for 2022?
oh, 2022. I'm excited for 2022. I'm shifting some of my energies over to the 29 community more fully. I mean, I was fully engaged with them, but even more fully engaged with that community and working with that community on a more day-to-day basis throughout the season, which I'm really excited about. That's really fun. I've been with the vacation races community as well, the first part of this season. And I absolutely adore that community. And it's exciting. I'm excited to go to Whistler with 29 this year.
Mhm.
There's new places. And my husband and I actually, for the past 2 years, due to COVID and everything, we don't get to race a lot. Everybody always thinks, people who don't know what we do, they're like, boy, you run a lot of races. I'm like, no. I actually work at these events. And so, contrary to what a lot of people believe, we haven't got to do a lot of things for ourselves in the past few years because we've been really busy, which we're really grateful for. And we had an event that was scheduled for 2020. Of course, like everything else, it got canceled. And so my husband and I are going to go and do a 6-day stage race called Trans Rockies in Colorado this August. So we'll be there this August. That's kind of our thing that's on our list for the year. So I'm excited about that.
That sounds fun. I will definitely follow you.
Yeah, it's a super fun race. They call it like a running camp for big kids, where you go run 20 miles in the Colorado Rockies, and they set you up a tent and you sleep in it and do it again for 6 days. It's an amazing event. So I'm looking forward to kind of turning all the electronics off and going and running in the beautiful mountains for a few days. So it'll be good.
That sounds fantastic. I am definitely looking forward to seeing you in person in Vermont in October.
Yes, I can't wait. That's what, this virtual world. I love to connect with people virtually and over podcasts, and the way that we can connect is so amazing. I'm very grateful for that, but there's nothing like a big hug when you've met somebody virtually. And I promise, I know exactly where we're going to be in Stratton, and you're going to walk up to me and we're going to have this great reunion, and I am going to just love it. It will just fill my heart so much.
Yes, I am very excited. Anything you want our listeners to know about?
My goodness. I I love the name of the podcast, the I Can Do Anything podcast. And I feel like people really need to take that to heart. We talked about like my own insecurities of thinking like, oh my gosh, I seem so brave on the outside, but truly, I have seen so many people do things that they never thought possible just because they were willing to try. And it's amazing the ability that you have inside yourself, regardless if you are a 30-minute miler or if you're a 6-minute miler. The abilities that you have are incredible. So don't pass up the opportunity to step out of that comfort zone and to go try something, because on the other side of it is this different version of yourself, is this new connection that you have with other people. So I just love that your podcast is encouraging people to just go and do. And I would just add to that sentiment that, I've seen it time and time and time again. People who are like, I've never even done a 5K, and I watch them complete a 36-hour Everesting challenge. It is possible. You can do amazing things. So go and do it. Live fully and just love fully on your way to that summit. So,
I can't think of a better way to end the podcast.
well, thank you, Robin. This has been awesome. I'm so glad that I got to sit down with you today.
Thank you for joining us today. And to all of our listeners, stay awesome and keep reaching for your anything.